I had been internet stalking Pete Ashton for several months before I came across a blog post called Cross City Walks, dated February the 16th, 2010. In it, Pete outlined an idea he'd had for a psychogeographical exercise inspired by the urban walking exploits of Will Self and Bill Drummond. The idea was simple. You take a map of Birmingham, choose a point on the outer circle bus route, and from it draw a line straight through the centre of the city and out the other side, finishing at the opposite point on the bus route. You then walk this line. The purpose of such an exercise is to experience the city in a different way and see if you learn anything. I was eager to know what Pete had learnt from these walks, but to my dismay I couldn't find any follow-up posts on the blog. It appeared that for some reason Pete had never put this idea into practice. This bothered me. I couldn't rest while this tantalising loose end was left untied. It seemed internet stalking just wasn't going to cut it anymore. I needed closure, and I needed to get out of the house. I tentatively sent Pete an email introducing myself and suggesting that we do the cross-city walks together. That way I could get some fresh air, Pete could finally blog about his findings, and then we could both go back to our lives. For some reason, Pete agreed to this random invitation. I later found out that it's because he feeds off the energy of people younger than himself. And so we arranged to meet at an 11C bus stop on Lordswood Road, Harborne, at 9 a.m. on the 27th of October 2014. In the days leading up to the walk, I thought about what the walk might be like and what we might learn. I imagined that we would stroll at a leisurely pace, paying close attention to our surroundings, examining the changes in landscape and mood as we passed through the different areas. Maybe we'd stop from time to time to make notes, take pictures, and even talk to some of the locals. We may be following a line, but it wasn't going to be about getting from one end to the other as quickly as possible. If anything, it would be about slowing down and taking in the things that we usually hurry past on the way to somewhere else.
Hello, I'm Pete Ashton. I once wrote a blog post about walking across cities in straight lines, and thanks to a young chap called Andy, I eventually put it into practice. Walking across cities in straight lines gives you plenty of time to contemplate what it means to walk across cities in straight lines. Here are some of those contemplations. Comparing opposing districts is fascinating. When dealing with a city of the size and diversity of Birmingham, it can be really hard to comprehend exactly what you're dealing with. By just walking a single line through the city, we keep things simpler, and it helps to make any differences we come across starker. While walking from King's Heath through to Handsworth Wood, we pass first through Moseley, the trendy middle-class leafy borough, and then later its opposite, Lozells, one of the poorest districts in the country. The difference could not have been more stark, and it utterly erased any notion we might have had about there being one Birmingham.
The big day finally came, and we met at the arranged spot. We hit it off straight away, which was lucky, because otherwise we'd have been in for an awkward few hours. I took a deep breath and tried to attune myself with my surroundings in preparation for the journey ahead. As I was doing so, I noticed that Pete was attaching a bizarre piece of machinery around his torso. I knew from the internet stalking that he was into his gizmos and high-tech jiggery pokery, so I didn't think much of it. Pete explained that it was a chest mount harness for a GoPro camera, and he was going to use it to record our walk. He set it up to take a photo automatically every 5 seconds, and once he was sure it was working, we set off. What a thrill it was to be walking alongside renowned internet personality and 2007 Brummie of the Year runner-up, Mr. Pete Ashton himself. I immediately forgot all that stuff about being in tune with the city and observing the lay of the land. Pete Ashton was tweeting about me. I was enthralled. Everything he said was fascinating, even though I didn't understand a word of it. He told me he spent the previous night turning selfies into music. He told me about his investigations into remix culture and the aesthetics of decay through user attrition. He told me about his idea to turn the BT tower into a giant periscope. He told me about a new mini helicopter drone that he was thinking of buying so that he could put a camera on it and explore the inaccessible reaches of the city. I spent the next couple of hours in a state of equal parts awe and befuddlement. Next thing I knew, we had passed right through the city centre and were approaching Saltley. So much for taking in our surroundings. It was purely by chance that I noticed the River Ray as we crossed it. I had needed a place to dispose of my banana skin, and so I peered over the wall at the side of the pavement, and there was the river several feet below us, languidly passing beneath the city and its brick culvert. The spell that Pete had cast over me was broken, and I was seized by an acute sense of guilt. I'd always had a fondness for Birmingham's forgotten river, the life force of the city, shunned and ignored, but always reassuringly present. And yet, were it not for the lack of adequate rubbish disposal facilities in this part of the city, I would have walked straight past it without so much as a glance. How had this happened? This walk that was supposed to attune us to the rhythms and flows of the city was actually having the opposite effect. "Pete," I said. "What?" "It's the River Ray." "Oh yeah," he said, nodding in acknowledgement before turning back to the walk. "Can't we stop here for a bit?" "No, I'd rather get on if you don't mind, my feet are sore." "Well, can you hold the GoPro over the wall and get a photo?" "No, that's cheating."
Wearing a camera is socially awkward. I undertook these walks with a GoPro camera strapped to my chest. Despite being small, it is rather conspicuous, and people did notice the black circle of the lens immediately. We kept a steady pace, so there was no real chance for confrontation, but in some areas I felt I was being rude, walking through people's communities and taking photos of them without consent. Amplified by my being a middle-aged, middle-class white guy photographing ethnically diverse areas of poverty, where cameras are primarily used for policing and punishment. This discomfort on my part made me think that we were probably engaging in a form of class tourism. GoPro photos warp reality in interesting ways. The GoPro is a wide-angle camera. Wide-angle photographs do show you a lot of the scenery and can help you to understand the context of a scene. But in doing so, they push the background much further away. This means that their representation of reality is skewed towards the foreground. The images are not an accurate record. They are warped by a device which attempts to show everything, but in doing so emphasizes only that which is around the camera. The footage becomes about the walker, not about the walk, the individual, not the community. The GoPro is therefore a selfish device, which is inevitable for a tool that came out of the extreme sports scene.
That night, Pete sent over a time-lapse that he'd put together from the photos taken on the GoPro. I saw our walk flash before my eyes at a rate of 10 frames per second, condensing a 3+ hour experience into a mere 220 seconds. It was exhilarating. The walk that I had previously considered a failure had now been transformed into something completely different. It was given a new context that neither of us could possibly have anticipated, and it sent tingles down my spine. Pete was clearly excited by the results as well. "I think we need to do more walks," he said. "Yeah," I agreed. The GoPro was now our master. We embraced our servitude and followed obediently where it led us. No diversions, no dallying, just straight down the line. Outer Circle bus stop to Outer Circle bus stop, via Cathedral, repeat. We were merely 2 pairs of legs in the service of the chest-mounted Cyclops. Doggedly we marched on through the winter months, maintained by the knowledge that our monocular friend had a plan that would be revealed to us in time. Pete became obsessed with walking as straight as possible and keeping the camera's view free of obstruction. He developed an extremely efficient mechanical way of eating and drinking without ever bringing his hands in front of his chest. If he had to break for the toilet or some caffeine, he would stop dead in his tracks, pause the camera, go off and do his business, return to the exact same spot, realign himself, resume the camera recording, and continue as if nothing had happened. I too became preoccupied with the GoPro, always aware of its presence and the importance of its record. From time to time I would catch myself contemplating some interesting brickwork on a canal building, or admiring an exposed crop of red sandstone. But these reveries rarely lasted more than a few moments before I'd return to the task in hand. Every now and then I would call Pete back to come and look at something, such as the nice view of the city skyline just visible between 2 houses. On such occasions, Pete would stop impatiently, walk backwards with his head over his shoulder so as not to turn the GoPro from its course, look at what I was pointing to, grunt in acknowledgement, and then continue immediately onwards.
The line pushes you into the hinterland. When we walked the route from Birmingham University to Spaghetti Junction, we thought we'd be comparing the 2 monolithic institutions which just happened to be opposite each other. But the real interest happened along the trauma-scarred periphery of the Aston Expressway, where we were forced into a desert of industrial estates and business parks. Each one was a monument to the investment and regeneration policies of the post-industrial era, some successful, many not so. The architecture along this route was atrocious, but it didn't matter as no one would ever pass this way accidentally. Areas are connected in new ways. The road network joins up the city in a rigid manner. Even when walking, you will tend to keep to the main routes because they're easier and safer. It takes effort to find the straightest line and get off that beaten track. As regular explorers of Birmingham, we had been to most of the places on our routes, but we'd never connected them in this way. The path in and out of the city centre was always a novelty, as crossings of the inner ring road happened at very specific points. On our first walk, we came across this incongruous statue of Charles Blodin, a 19th century tightrope walker who had traversed the Edgbaston Reservoir. And our route from Acots Green to Digbeth saw us pass through many peripheries rather than following the A roads. Our mental map of Birmingham, our cortical bromunculus, was expanded.
After each walk, Pete would upload the time-lapse to Vimeo and I would watch, entranced. He played around with different playback speeds and did things I didn't understand, like slit scanning. I think it was his way of trying to make sense of what we were doing. We talked about possibilities for future walks, different ways we could record them, people we might like to invite, and the different perspectives they might bring. It felt like there were so many possibilities with cross-city walks, and so many directions it could be taken in. But that would be the next stage. For now, the GoPro was king. We had agreed to carry on just the two of us, completing the walks and recording the time-lapses until it became clear what to do next. Although we mostly kept on the move during the walks, there were the odd times when we both felt it appropriate to sit down for a minute or so to reflect and refuel. January the 2nd was a particularly fine day, and as we passed through Aston on our way to Stockland Green, we took some time to sit beside the lake in Salford Park, admiring the spectacular view of Spaghetti Junction. Fishermen dotted the opposite bank, and the bare poplar trees swayed in the breeze. Some ducks landed on the surface, disturbing the reflection of the mighty concrete structure. As we sat there, eating our sandwiches, listening to the soothing rumble of the Aston Expressway, I was overcome by the implausible harmony of the whole scene, and just for a moment, I felt entirely at peace with my city and everything in it. Although the walks hadn't provided all the insights I first imagined they would, perhaps if they could just offer up moments like this from time to time, then it was all worth it. It looked as though Pete had been having a little moment as well. He turned to me with that excited look that he has when he's about to talk about algorithms or something. "I've just had an idea for an installation," he said. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah."
A common conundrum for artists who walk with cameras is what to do with the gigabytes of data you produce. After 4 walks, I had hundreds of thousands of photographs of Birmingham, on their own quite mundane, but en masse kind of interesting. What could I do with them? At the 2015 Flatpack Film Festival, Andy had curated a day of films about walking. Above the Digbeth venue where this took place was an empty space, recently cleared of pigeon shit and suitable for humans. With a zero budget, we assembled a rear projection of the photos, which were moved by walking a treadmill, enabling people to traverse our ersatz Birmingham at their own pace. A literal walking film. These sets of photos became my go-to for any digital jiggery-pokery I wanted to experiment with, much to the befuddlement of Andy, and most of them were just that, experiments. Here's a kaleidoscope. Here's a cone scan, where the middle of the image is further ahead in the future than the edges. Here's photos treated as a panorama, where the computer attempts to stitch them together and fails miserably. This is one of my first attempts using the focus stacking algorithm, albeit not for its intended purpose. About a year later, I was playing with T-Distributed Stochastic Neighbour Embedding, or TSNE. This is a statistical visualization tool that was popular with computational artists at the time, because unlike most statistical visualization tools, it would produce something that was quite pretty. I asked the TSNE algorithm to categorize sections of the photos from one walk based on visual similarity, and produced a massive composite image which I titled A Portrait of Birmingham. I liked how it looked like a landscape painting, but zooming in revealed it to be composed of street-level photography. It was exhibited at a group show at Vivid Projects and now lives online, where you can explore the city from a new perspective yourself.
So why revisit this project now, after all this time? Could it be that Cross City Walks has a 5-year life, death and rebirth cycle that Pete and I are simply vessels for? There were 5 years between Pete having the original idea and me prompting him to put it into practice, and now here we are again after another 5 years making it into a film. Whether by doing this we are kick-starting the next phase of the cycle, or merely tying a neat bow on something that will remain in the past, it's been great to look back and feel once more the stirrings of excitement and possibility that come from the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. My new decade's resolution is to do more walking, and maybe yours should be too. The adventure starts on the doorstep, or in this case, at the bus stop.